Good afternoon. My name is Maysa Hawwash, co-founder of Doctors Against Genocide. I'm here today with my colleagues representing health and humanitarian organizations and advocates, gathered today to make a simple demand and concrete demands. Each of us will speak for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we will take some questions. Today is Palestinian Prisoners' Day, but let's be clear, it should be called Palestinian Hostages' Day, because describing Palestinians as prisoners softens and obscures the criminal reality by which Palestinians are abducted, detained, tortured, and held without legal or medical access. These are not lawful detentions. These are acts of systemic violence. I stand before you not just as a health advocate, but as a Palestinian who has lived under apartheid, someone who has experienced firsthand the trauma of passing through checkpoints, dehumanized at every turn, who has watched neighbors disappear in the middle of the night, heard the sounds of raids on my neighbors' homes, the yelling and screaming of the so-called soldiers as they break into homes and abduct our sons and daughters. I have seen how fear becomes the air we breathe. Every single day, the world sees the evidence of what is happening. Right now, there are 350 Palestinian children detained in Israeli prisons. Children under 18 locked up in military facilities like Ofer and Megiddo. Are these just statistics, or are they children? Children who wake up every morning behind bars instead of being woken up by their mothers to get ready for school. Children who woke up as hostages for the sole crime of being Palestinian, for no reason other than breathing the air of their own homeland. Palestinian hostages are yet another manifestation of the ongoing, unrelenting genocide on the Palestinian people. Since October 2023, the number of Palestinian detainees has increased by 83%, from 50 to 150 to over 9,600 hostages. That is an 83% increase in arrests, abductions, detentions, and disappearances. And over 3,500 of those are held without charge or trial. Just disappeared because Israel says so. Nearly half of prisoners are held without any accountability. I'm not here, though, to talk about statistics. I want to talk about the architecture of fear. Not random acts of violence, but a systemic, calculated infrastructure designed to break the human spirit. It begins with classification. Every day, children, mothers, fathers are forced to experience the brutal apartheid presence of Israel as they line up for hours, while soldiers determines who passes and who doesn't based on permits, IDs, and arbitrary rules. And as occupying forces raid neighborhoods and attack civilians for simply being there, we are separated, we are labeled, we are othered through deeply racist mechanisms that make humiliation routine. I have seen how this stress manifests in children, chronic anxiety and developmental delays that affect entire generations. It is by design. Next is systemic dehumanization. One thing is for sure, this is not about justice. It is about breaking people. Torture becomes standard practice, physical, psychological, and sexual. Humiliation is intentional. Basic humanity, food, water, and medical care is denied as a matter of policy. Our medical teams have documented prisoners whose conditions worsen and lead to death because treatment is deliberately withheld. Palestinian families are even ordered not to celebrate the release of their loved ones after months and years of detention. If they do, they are threatened with retaliation and rearrest because joy has become an enemy of the apartheid state. Condition creation is central to this system of fear. When ambulances are delayed at checkpoints, when medications run out due to siege, when mobility restrictions prevent access to care, this is collective punishment designed to weaken entire populations. For Palestinians, the fear of losing loved ones has become ingrained in our DNA, because healing and life itself is not guaranteed. Just a few days ago, I was speaking to a friend of mine. She had spent 2 hours in absolute terror. She lives just 5 minutes away from Ramallah. Settlers protected by Israeli occupation forces stormed her village, attacked people, and stole around 180 cattle. She told me they were frozen with fear. For 2 hours, they did not dare move, close the windows, because they didn't want to attract any attention. She was worried for her 14-year-old boy just because he was a Palestinian boy. And this is standard practice. In Palestine, arbitrary arrest and detention are not exceptions. They are the system. They manufacture fear, fracture families, and raise children to know their existence can be criminalized at any moment. When we say no Palestinian is safe, we are naming a reality built over decades, checkpoint by checkpoint, detention by detention. No Palestinian chose to live under this occupation, yet we are criminalized for the sheer act of living. This is why Doctors Against Genocide documents what others ignore, because we understand the architecture. Naming the architecture is the first step to dismantling it, because once you see the pattern, you can no longer claim ignorance. Standing here, though, on Parliament Hill fills me with apprehension. This government allows weapons to flow into Israel that kills my brothers and sisters, that kill our own children and children of people in Lebanon and Iran. It provides political and diplomatic cover and enables impunity. It offers empty words that manufacture consent for the killing and torture of my own people. Mr. Carney, how do you sleep at night, knowing that your decisions and words provide the cover to allow genocide to continue? And now it is my absolute honor to introduce Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, a Palestinian physician and the president of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, who will speak to us on how this has become a codified policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I greet everybody who's attending this press conference today. I think the story of Palestinian hostages or prisoners, as they call them, is a very long one. As a matter of fact, since 1967, when we were occupied by the Israeli army, 1 million arrests took place. You can imagine, out of 5 million people, 1 million arrests during all these years. And today, it's not only that 9,500 people are put in most difficult conditions, including, as was said, 350 children and 73 women, but many of them are losing their lives. Since October 7th, due to torture, beating, mistreatment, starvation, and deprivation of medical care, we already lost 90 of our hostages in Israeli jails. And most recently, they've just passed a terrible law, a death penalty law against Palestinians. A death penalty law, which in my opinion is meant to justify and legalize the acts of killing against Palestinian hostages. We estimate that between 1,000 and 2,000 Palestinian prisoners in Gaza Strip were already field executed by the Israeli army. Not only the 90 people who were killed in Israeli jails, but also a huge number of people who were field executed. And we think that time will show how many of those people were really field executed. Now, in addition to that, this death penalty law is a very dangerous one. Imagine, it says if a Palestinian kills an Israeli, he will be subjected to death penalty. And this death penalty does not require even consensus of judges. And if somebody is judged to face death penalty, the execution has to take place by hanging in less than 90 days. And there is no possibility of re-examining such judgment. This law is the most racial and most discriminatory because it consolidates the system of apartheid. If a Palestinian kills an Israeli, he will be subjected to death penalty. If an Israeli kills a Palestinian, this law will not apply to them. So this is a further consolidation of the situation of two laws for two different people living on the same land. One civil law for Israelis and one military law for Palestinians. And the death penalty applies only to Palestinians. This is way beyond and much worse than the system of apartheid that prevailed in South Africa at one point of time. Because then nobody, even the apartheid system, did not dare to say that if a black man kills a white man, he will be assassinated and he will be hanged. But if a white man kills a black man, he will not be. That's a most discriminatory law. Second to that, this law shows how far fascism is growing. And you can imagine what happened in the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, when they celebrated the passing of this law by drinking glasses of champagnes. They were celebrating passing the death penalty. And many of these Israeli members of Knesset were putting on their chests symbols of the ropes that will be used to hang Palestinians. This, in my opinion, is a reflection of how deep and far fascism has gone. To stop that, to change that, to reverse that, and to stop the suffering of Palestinian hostages in Israeli jails, we need more than just condemnations and statements of criticism. Condemnations do not affect Israel. Only if sanctions are imposed on the Israeli parliament for passing this law, only if Israel understands that the continuation of fascist behavior against Palestinian people and the racist apartheid system, only if they understand that these systems will be met with sanctions and boycott, they will be affected and these terrible things would stop. So please take measures. Tell the Israeli Knesset that it will be boycott unless it reverses this law of discrimination. Tell them that Israel will not receive military aid or military support or military equipment as long as it continues the system of occupation, apartheid, and genocide against the Palestinian people. Thank you.
I just returned from Barcelona, Spain yesterday. I organized with a group called Canadian Boat to Gaza, which is part of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition that has been sending boats to Gaza to challenge and ultimately break Israel's illegal siege and blockade on Gaza for the past 16 years. Seeing everyday people organize and mobilize is inspiring and hopeful, but it is deeply frustrating and infuriating to see that this work is even necessary. Because to end Israel's illegal siege and blockade on Gaza is the responsibility of the international community, specifically the responsibility of states and governments, including the Canadian government. Adorned on the boats sailing to Gaza included flags from many parts of the world, and of course many Palestinian flags, to express solidarity with Palestine and Palestinians and their right to life, self-determination, existence, and their right to return to their traditional homelands. Also were flags calling for the release and freedom of Marwan Barghouti, who has been imprisoned by the Israeli military for 24 years. I'm also part of a group called Doctors Against Genocide, a global coalition of healthcare workers dedicated to succeeding where governments have failed in confronting genocide. Over a year ago, I was on a call with Doctors Against Genocide, and I got to hear directly from Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, as he shared updates from Kamal Adwan Hospital, of which he was the medical director of and where he worked as a pediatrician. He was taken hostage by the Israeli military in December 2024, over a year ago, and he remains in Israeli captivity because he stayed back in the hospital to care for his patients, for his people, and for his community. The Palestinian prisoner struggle for liberation is the Palestinian struggle for liberation. The Palestinian prisoner struggle for liberation is the heart of the Palestinian struggle for liberation. It is the most professional and ethical thing to do to call an end for genocide. It is the most human and humane thing to do to call for the freedom of people who are oppressed. Medical associations and other professional associations have largely, if not completely, failed to maintain equal respect for the right to life and freedom for Palestinians. This is a blatant act of dehumanization, and their silence demonstrates their complicity. While we stand here, firmly, affirming Palestinians and their right to dignity and their right to life and freedom, including freedom for all the Palestinian hostages and prisoners, and freedom from the torture and inhumane treatment they are subjected to by the Israeli military. Solidarity is the moral imperative. It is how we stay human in the face of immeasurable and unfathomable human trauma and suffering that is entirely preventable. Our solidarity is our response to an unjust reality and system of colonial domination and subjugation of Palestinians. The response of our Canadian government and our Canadian civil society will shape how we all perceive if one was on the right side of history by standing with Palestinian prisoners and with the oppressed in this world, or if one chooses to stand with the oppressors, the Israeli military and their government who continue to commit mass atrocities, including the crime of genocide against Palestinians. I urge all members of Parliament and all members of the public in Canada to amplify Palestinian stories and their narratives, to support the Red Ribbon campaign, to support the international campaign to free all Palestinian political prisoners, and to support the Let Me Carry Your Voice project, amplifying Palestinian testimonies. I want to share with you testimony from someone who is my age in Gaza. A 31-year-old male arrested at Netzarim checkpoint, held for a total of 53 days, initially at the checkpoint before being transferred to an unknown military camp and the Negev prison. He was interviewed 151 days after his release. I was hoping that the next morning would come and I would die. I really hoped to die. The reality of the strikes made me feel extremely humiliated, especially given my high status in the neighborhood and at home. Imagine telling your family and friends what happened to you. I was severely beaten by one of the soldiers, resulting in 3 broken ribs in my chest. The pain is still all over my body, and I cannot move or stand. The scars from the plastic ties are still on my hands. Whenever I look at them, I remember what happened to me inside the detention center and how helpless I was, unable to even defend myself. From time to time, I also feel pain in my chest from the fracture I suffered. His story and countless others are available to read in a report titled Torture and Genocide: The Shattered Futures of Former Palestinian Detainees in Gaza, written by the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. Ample other reports are available by various human rights organizations. Learn their stories. Speak up, organize, mobilize, and act. History is watching us. We are calling for an immediate release of all Palestinian hostages and political prisoners, including healthcare workers, an end to administrative detention, torture, and medical abuse, immediate access to legal representation, family visits, healthcare, and adequate water, food, and hygiene for all prisoners, an end to Canada's complicity in Israeli occupation and genocide.
When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Israel shows itself to be a state fueled by hatred for Palestinian life. It shows us that this hatred can activate a violence so unrestrained that the term genocide feels insufficient. This isn't an accolade to be celebrated. And yet celebrate is exactly what members of the Israeli regime did when they passed a death penalty law reserved exclusively for Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. Prison is an interesting term. I bet that most Canadians associate the term prison with criminal. That if someone is in prison, they deserve to be there because they've done something seriously wrong. Prisons are a predictable feature of our society. We've collectively agreed, through precedent or lack of imagination, that prisons must exist to punish those who grievously transgress our laws. And so when we hear the term prison, we've been trained to think criminal. The Palestinians in prison force us to rethink that assumption. Right now, there are 9,600 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. These include men, women, and children, all of whom were taken by a system that is reserved exclusively for Palestinians. Israelis are not subject to this system. There is no standard of evidence. And even within this deeply unfair system, the Israeli government hasn't even bothered to charge the majority of those detainees with any crime, showing how flimsy the veneer really is on Israel's racist, unjust carceral apparatus. Despite not having been charged with anything at all, being in the prison system means that they are subject to a significant amount of abuse that has been well documented by human rights organizations, journalists, and the victims themselves. They are routinely beaten, starved, and raped by both soldiers and by dogs. And when they cannot speak, their bodies tell us the story. In October of last year, the Israeli regime released roughly 1,700 hostages from their prisons. Some of those released were unidentified corpses, people from Gaza, stolen from their homes, off the street, from hospitals, held without charge, with no ability to communicate with loved ones or legal counsel, and killed in myriad brutal ways. My staff was present on the ground in Gaza to receive those bodies and reported back that they were clearly mutilated. Some bodies had their hands tied and put behind their backs. They were in distorted positions with obvious signs of torture. Many had fingers cut off. One man had his head smashed in. Many, too many, were so badly brutalized that it was nearly impossible to identify the bodies. It must be said very clearly. Israel returned these bodies mutilated and with obvious signs of torture because they knew that they could get away with it. Over and over again, the world has turned away from Israel's war crimes. As a signatory to several international conventions, including the Convention Against Torture and the Geneva Conventions, the Canadian government is compelled to speak out against the systemic abuse of Palestinians being held hostage in Israeli prisons. Further, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights explicitly requires that all persons deprived of their liberty be treated with humanity and respect for their inherent dignity. Canada's ratification of that covenant means that we must advocate for these standards globally, not just within our own borders. Canada has previously stated that it is, quote, deeply concerned by reports on the torture and abuse of Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons, including sexual violence. Although it recognizes that no such treatment is ever justifiable in any context, it has taken no meaningful action to intervene, to follow words with action, and hold Israel accountable for its egregious systemic abuses. It is to our eternal shame as a nation that we have not pursued every avenue to liberate Palestinian prisoners from the inhumanity of their Israeli gulags. Today, we ask the government to end our shame and act now to free Palestinians and to free Palestine.
Did you know that Israeli doctors participate in the torture of Palestinian healthcare workers and the Canadian government supports it? Today, on Palestinian Prisoners' Day, we call for an end to the torture and the immediate release of all Palestinian political prisoners. I'm a general surgeon, and I'm speaking on behalf of Health Workers Alliance for Palestine. In September 2025, I traveled to Gaza and I saw firsthand the torture and genocide that occurs in Palestine at the hands of Israel. Israel controls all borders, creating a catastrophic lack of food, water, and shelter. It's one of the few places in the world where you can be turned away at the border for bringing in life-saving medications or equipment. Israel deliberately destroys infrastructure, roads, sanitation facilities, power grids, in an attempt to kill and make Gaza unlivable. And Canada continues to provide Israel with diplomatic support, technology, and weapons, despite mendacious claims to the contrary. We demand an end to this active collaboration in Israel's genocide in Palestine. Israeli prisons are a microcosm of the broader system of Zionist settler colonialism. There are 9,600 Palestinians held captive in Israeli prisons, as you've heard already. They're handcuffed, blindfolded, zip-tied, 24/7 for months at a time, even years. No due process, no lawyers. We demand an end to this abhorrent system and immediate access to lawyers, family visits, food, water, and hygiene. And Israel specifically targets the healthcare system, besieging and bombing hospitals to kill, injure, and prevent life-saving care. Their message is deliberate. Nowhere is safe. And yet Palestinian health workers have continued to excel in their fields, as I've seen myself. Under siege, they provide highly specialized care. Beneath bombs, they train the next generation of medical professionals. For this, they have been targeted for decades. And the targeting of health workers is an early warning sign of genocide. Dr. Issam Abu Ajwe, a senior general surgeon, was performing emergency general surgery when Israeli soldiers dragged him out of the operating room and took him into detention. Interrogators were instructed to damage his hands so that he could no longer perform surgery. In the past 2.5 years, 1,722 healthcare workers have been killed, hundreds detained, and close to 100 remain in captivity today. We have grave concerns for their safety. 6 prominent healthcare workers have already been killed in detention due to torture, starvation, and medical neglect. And as you've already heard, Israel passed a law that turns this killing into official state policy. This is genocide behind bars. We must act now to stop administrative detention, torture, medical abuse, and mass execution. But despite systemic targeting, Palestinian health workers persist. Hospitals, clinics are rebuilt. 168 Palestinian medical students recently graduated in front of Al-Shifa Hospital. And after his release, Dr. Abu Ajwe said, "Even if my body is torn apart, I will continue to perform surgery, heal my patients, and serve my people as long as I'm alive." As healthcare workers, we demand freedom for our colleagues and all political prisoners. Today at 5 p.m. at the Human Rights Monument, we will be gathering to honor martyred and detained health workers, followed by a community march in solidarity. We invite all members of the press, all members of the community to come join us. And we thank you all for your attention, and we're now open for questions.
Thank you. Merci. Il n'y a pas de questions pour le moment. There are no questions at the moment. This concludes the press conference. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse.